Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
You know, and I think that's an interesting point that you bring up, because I've interviewed a lot of people who talk about skinwalkers. I've also interviewed people who have studied the skinwalker folklore. They've been to Skinwalker Ranch, they've studied the history around it. And what's really bizarre is that a lot of these people who are having these experiences, it's like they kind of fit a Skinwalker type incident, but there's more to it, if that makes sense.
Right.
There's so much more built into it. And it's almost becoming like a different phenomena. Like it's becoming something totally separate from Skinwalker, but yet it relates to Skinwalker.
Oh yeah, and like I'd assume that what it is what has been labeled as a Skinwalker, but I've also been told in this certain situation that it was actually a bear walk, which everything I've looked up about a bear walk, it really doesn't seem anything like it. But according to my native buddies, like it can kind of like be a lot of things. Like it doesn't have to be the particular things that. So
when you say a bear walk,
yeah,
what do you mean specifically about that?
It's I guess it's a native spirit, and I believe that skinwalkers are bear walks and bear walks are skinwalkers. Honestly,
okay,
they seem similar, like in the fact that they want to try to lure you.
Mm-hmm.
A bear walk, typically, from what I've understood, is something that will show itself in the woods as like a light.
Okay.
So people will kind of try to go to it, or a bear, I guess, or maybe it turns into a bear and it hurts them. There's a lot of like it'll visit 3 times in 3 nights or something like that, and on the 3rd night it'll kill you.
Really?
But I don't know. I tried my best to understand. There's a lot. It's a pretty wide variety of stuff that could happen.
Yeah.
All I know is that the people I was living with, they're native, and they're Ojibwe.
Okay.
And they 100% believe that what they had was a bear walk that's been following them, like that attached itself to their family.
Okay.
And has been harassing them.
Interesting. Now, would you let the audience know kind of in a roundabout way where this was located at?
So where I lived for a long time was Mount Pleasant, Michigan, which is right in the center of the Mitt.
Okay.
And we were kind of outside of town quite a few miles, like I'd say 10 miles out, and on like reservation land. Mm-hmm. And I really think that has something to do with it. And okay. I tend to believe my native friends when they tell me, about these spirits and about, them being really old and not necessarily like just single entities either. Like mm-hmm. There's just a lot going on out there. And from my perspective, just knowing the history of what went on out there with, I'm sure there were mass burials. I know there were mass burials in certain areas that wasn't too far from where I was, of natives. And they had this old native school that was really freaky. I never even went in there because I was too afraid to go. And I was never really like that.
No,
I think there's something evil, something angry that just kind of exists around this area and is really prevalent out in the country.
Okay. And correct me again, you said Massachusetts?
Oh, no, Michigan.
Michigan.
Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Michigan. Okay. So, Michigan, up north, right? You have the Great Lakes that are up there. I know that Michigan does have a lot of strange phenomena that happen. Have you ever thought that it's possible it might be a Wendigo?
No, not a Wendigo. I've never really I know all about Wendigo. That's never crossed my mind. Nothing like that, or like Bigfoot or anything. I know Bigfoot's really popular around there, but I just went across country. It's popular everywhere I go.
Yeah, and
But
I know that a lot of times people will they will look at location as kind of a factor to say if you're in, the desert area, chances are it was a skinwalker. But then if you're more north, you're looking at Wendigo, which is also Native American. And then they have other names for these other creatures that as you go southeast, especially, and then onto the East Coast. But I think the big thing to take away from it is that all of these creatures in this phenomenon itself seem to be the same, and they seem to share the same, traits, or maybe not traits, but the outcome of all these stories are very similar in how they look.
I think
and
America, but like Yaogwai and stuff like that too. Like there's all sorts of stuff that all follow the same pattern.
yeah,
like a big beast man thing.
Yeah, exactly. And I honestly think that a lot of times when we look at these things that, cryptids, and there's so many different creatures out there, like the Mothman, there's Bigfoot, obviously, but as they start talking about these different things and what they look like, it makes me question, like, I wonder if people are seeing really the same stuff. Like it's similar, because some of these things fly, some of them look, kind of witchy, which, like, just kind of like a spirit, or maybe like a spirit transitioning into something, into the physical. There's always talks about portals. There's talks about, dimensions, like shifting, and just weird stuff that comes out of all these stories. But it doesn't matter where you're at, is what I'm trying to get at. You could be east, west, north, south. It doesn't matter. The only thing that changes really is the name, essentially. And I know some people are going to be a little offended by that, because, they say there's specifics about each cryptid, but really the Skinwalker shouldn't even be considered a cryptid, I don't think, because it's a witch. It's more of a spiritual phenomenon anyway. It's a curse, that was put on from Native American tribes. Wendigo is the same. And, it doesn't, to me, I don't put those into a cryptid category. Instead, I put them into more of just a paranormal, just a straight paranormal entity, because we don't know if it's demonic, if it's like a witchcraft thing, if it's extraterrestrial. I know I've had some guys tell me that they think these things are extraterrestrial creatures that are fifth dimension, or something to that effect, that come into this physical realm.
Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised by that, Like, who's to say they're not all coming from the same place? If we're talking about portals and dimensions, I don't think, like,
exactly,
borders really matter.
Yeah, exactly. So tell me a little bit about what happened and how this came about.
Okay. So when I was little, I had some paranormal experiences. I was always interested in, like, ghosts and spirits and things. And as I grew up, I just never really experienced it again. I didn't believe in it. And I met this girl who happened to be really into it. And she said she was a witch and all this. And I don't know. I think she dabbled with shit she didn't understand in hindsight. But I used to think it was just silly nonsense. And on her birthday, she got this little box of candles. I think it was black candles. And she said there was a wish ceremony that you can do in order to, like, have wishes granted. And she gave me one of the candles to do whatever I wanted. I said, I want to see spirits, ghosts. Not taking it seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And that very night, I started seeing, like, just kind of scary shadows in the bushes and stuff. I just kind of, like, oh, I'm drunk or I'm high or whatever. Like, no big deal.
Right.
But I started staying with my buddy out on the res. I didn't really have anywhere to go, and his aunt and uncle let me stay. And one night we were all partying, out in a garage, and I kept on seeing something in the corner of my eye, and it was really bizarre. It was like in the garage, there's the door to walk into, not the garage door, but the side door, and it had a window on it.
Okay.
In that window, I would see like this ghostly, pale, gaunt, freaky face, but almost in my peripherals. Every time I would look over, he would like slide out
Really?
with my peripherals. And I kept on bringing it up, being like, what the hell was that? Like, what is going on? And the people that own the house, the aunt and uncle, they like tried to ignore me.
Mm-hmm.
And they tried to, like distract me. And they wouldn't let me go to the door. They wouldn't let me go out to see what it was. So I knew something was up. Now, later that night, as things were winding down, we're all walking around in the garage and feeling like crunching noises, or like feeling crunches and hearing kind of crunches going on. And me and one of my friends in particular who saw it first, we were on acid. So we looked down and we're like, whoa, like the floor is like moving. It's all spiraling. This is crazy. This is trippy. What's going on?
Mm-hmm.
And then one of our friends who was just drinking looks down and he's like, starts gagging and he screams worms and then runs in and throws up. And lo and behold, we like got down far enough to see what it was. And it was just like almost literally the entire floor covered in maggots.
Really?
Like I've never seen anything like it. And I felt like it wasn't there before. And we just noticed it out of nowhere, like within 20 minutes at the end of the night. And, we all freaked out, went inside like, fuck this, went to bed. Mm-hmm. That night I caught my friend's aunt smudging. And the next morning we went out there was nothing there. And
Really?
I asked about it and she's like, no, there was nothing. I don't know what you're talking about.
Interesting. So you think that maybe she knew about it and was trying to create a barrier or protection to keep it
hard.
away?
Yeah, it was really hard to get them to open up about any of this kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. The more I talk to some of my native buddies, the more they tell me like, yeah, that's kind of like, that's kind of the belief is like, you don't want to talk about it, which I totally get. I feel like that's why I don't talk about it a lot of the time, other than the fact that I think people think I'm crazy, is like, it might come back and start happening again. And I eventually got them to break down and start talking a little bit. And they just kept saying like, it's a bear walk. It's evil. It's after our family. It's trying to attach itself to you. Don't go to it. Don't go near it. Don't approach it. But I really think it was more than that. I think that was one piece of the puzzle.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so let me ask you then a question that a lot of people are probably going to wonder about. Well, you mentioned you were on acid.
Oh, yeah.
Is that something that was like a first time on acid, or is that something that you've done before?
A lot.
Okay, so it's okay. No, I trust me, I get it. I've got buddies, but I'm just asking is, for people who are out there wondering, is this something that might have been a trip that you had? Can you explain that you kind of know the difference of it, and then also explain a little bit to, I guess, the fact that everybody else who was not on acid at the time knew what was happening as well?
Yeah, I mean, we were all inebriated in some way, but I mean, hallucinating maggots on the floor is kind of crazy. Mm-hmm. I could imagine that from far away. I could have seen that. I could have seen the swirls and stuff. And that's why I was thinking initially, like, this is trippy.
Okay.
But my buddy, who was also on it, was seeing the exact same thing. And we were, like, corroborating. And
so usually
like, there were people who weren't hallucinating at all that were like, yeah, there were maggots
so
on the floor.
Because I want to ask this because I've never done acid, but I am curious. So if you corroborate a story with somebody else who is on acid at the same time, it's not a hallucination then?
Not necessarily. You can have shared hallucinations.
Okay.
Like like that, and that's something that I've tried to tell myself for a long time now, is like, it was just hallucinations. It was just the drugs. And the problem is there were so much things that happened around it, and there was so much evidence that supported the fact that it wasn't just me. It wasn't just my personal opinion is that wish ceremony,
right,
that like ritual that they did, plus the drugs, plus where I was at, probably all had to factor into just how much whatever it was that was out there wanted to fuck with me. Like
Sure.
I felt like I was a beacon.
Sure.
And it became pretty obvious after a while, because that was nothing. That was just how it started, you know, like.
and I will say this is because we've done talks and shows on ketamine. We've done it on psilocybin. We've talked about LSD on this show before. So we've talked about drugs that could allow you to hallucinate certain things and why that is, and is it just a part of the brain, or is it something else that's happening? And I've got to say that from everything that I've seen and everything that I've heard is that drugs tend to open up something else, allowing this dimensional spiritual realm to kind of come in and attach itself. And I think that's why so many people have specific trips and I guess journeys. Some people call them journeys, but they're when you're doing something like, let's say for example, psilocybin, when you're about to hallucinate something. And I had one guy who was talking to ETs when he was on psilocybin. And I remember him saying that he knew it was an hallucination because he could look out of the corner of his eye. Like these lights that he was seeing that were in the sky, he could adjust his head a certain way because if it was a hallucination, it would follow him. Essentially, he understood the science behind the hallucination.
It's like Foust means like lights in your what do they call it, like optic phenomena or something along those lines.
And that's what he was trying to figure out, and I guess conclude that it was not the effect of what he was taking that was causing the hallucination, but instead what he was taking was opening up a mental doorway or something that he was able to communicate with something else. And that is, I believe, a big factor that we're discussing here. Because when we talk about Wendigos and Skinwalkers and we talk about Native Americans, they had certain drugs that they would take. And I know spiritual shamans, I know that they do ayahuasca, which is similar to DMT. It opens up essentially, it's like we live in a matrix, and when you're on something like DMT, it takes you out of the matrix. I have heard so many people who have done DMT that say, you have no idea what we're living in. This is not the real world at all.
Similar, right? Like, it's almost always aliens or God, but it's always the same kind of shit. And like, I've heard mechanical elves.
Yeah.
Some reason that's a big one with DMT too, but it's always like, it's never just a situation where like you're the only person that's experienced that exact thing, even though you have no connection to the next person that's had it. Right.
Exactly. So, okay. So you mentioned that there was some evidence to kind of back up this story. What did you mean by that?
I mean, I'm sure people can just say it's anecdotal or it's just like hearsay or whatever, but I had a lot of friends around at that time because the more and more I experienced that stuff, the more I wanted to reassure myself. Either I'm tripping it or it's real. And I've had a lot of people around. I used to have a buddy, my neighbor, actually, really good friend for a long time. I used to say, I need you to babysit. And he would know exactly what that would mean. It would mean, watch me, make sure I'm not, going too far. I'm not doing anything dumb and just experiencing the world around me with me. And he definitely saw a lot of the same shit I did and heard a lot. And actually at his house was really his parents' house that he lived at before he moved in next to me was out on the Chippewa River, which is on the reservation again, kind of close to the other place. And that place was evil as hell.
Really?
And particularly screw with him. And so when I was there, it would screw with me too. And it would just, like, it would shut off. Like, at first I'm like, okay, someone's screwing with us, flipping the breaker. But it would shut off a light. And then we'd be like, okay, whatever. And then we'd go and get on the TV, and it would shut off the cable.
Really?
And they're like, okay, let's play the PlayStation. The PlayStation would shut off and not work. And then the TV wouldn't work. And then we pull out the guitar. The amp stopped working. And then the guitar strings started breaking.
Really?
And, you know, like, it just methodically, like, broke us down into that, like, isolated situation where we had nothing else to do but to experience what was going on outside the window, which was basically what we were doing, was distracting ourselves from all the crazy shit that would go on out there. But I mean, I don't know if you've ever heard of this before, but there were these weird shadow men out there. It was bizarre, and we'd see them like jumping in the trees, them kind of encroaching on us in the woods. And they were almost so black that it was beyond black. I don't even know how to say it, like pitch black. But then they'd have this weird, like, kind of staticky effect that was going on in them. And sometimes I was tripping, sometimes I wasn't. But every night we'd go out there, we'd see that shit, and we'd see weird lights in the sky that we could only assume and agree with each other, like we saw UFOs. There's like a common occurrence over there.
So now these shadow men that you're talking about, is that something that you could see their eyes? Were their eyes glowing? Did they have any kind of clothes that they were wearing? Sometimes people talk about hat men.
Yeah, see, the hat man, I remember I have had experiences where kids actually that lived in the first house I was telling you about actually would always tell me about the hat man. And like literally like say the words hat man, which was kind of like bizarre because they're like 5, 6. I don't think they've ever heard of it. But there's a shadow. No, these guys though, like I would say naked. I would say like skinny, naked, bald men.
Okay.
I don't know, like you can't really tell. But
how tall do you think that they were?
5 to 6 foot. I wouldn't say super tall.
Okay.
I don't know if that's even a thing. I just know what we saw, and it was terrifying. Like we would climb up in a tree and sit there and watch them.
Yeah.
Watch us.
Well, I can imagine, because especially if you're somewhere that has a lot of energy, somewhere that has maybe some type of a portal or something that opens up. That's the whole premise behind Skinwalker Ranch, is the fact that the location itself is what's drawing them in. It's not necessarily the people who are there. The people are just that after effect of it, essentially. They're messed with because of whatever's moving through there.
Sensitive to it, right? That's what I believe. Like, just certain people are more sensitive to it than others, or some people just don't want to admit what they saw.
Yeah,
but I don't blame them.
Sure,
right?
Sure. No, I agree. So,
there's like a rift, and there's certain areas that are just rifts that just open doorways to like anything to get in. So, I've always wondered if you can go out, though.
Yeah, no, I've wondered that too. As a matter of fact, I've talked to people about that, especially Bigfoot hunters who believe that Bigfoot uses natural portals, and that's why they mark certain areas in the forest, is because there's a portal nearby. And I've heard them say that people can fall into it, and then that leads to the missing 411 and the whole backstory to all these people who go missing in the national forest, and that they were either taken or they fell into something, and it made them disappear completely. So I guess now the other question I have for you is, you mentioned 2 different places that you were at. Did this follow you? Or is it something different?
So there was a third location where I do believe 100% that the people who owned the house manufactured a situation, like they specifically wanted this thing to attach itself to us, and it did, and it
Really?
followed me home. And like I remember my mother, who was like straight-laced, like sober person, would start having terrible, freaky like experiences, like poltergeist type cabinets closing and slamming, and noises outside her window, and always getting this feeling like something's right there watching her. She'd get a lot of sleep paralysis. After it attached itself to me, that's what I would get too. Me and my girlfriend and I both would get sleep paralysis like all the time, and it was
Really?
horrifying.
Did you see anything during the sleep paralysis?
Yeah, I'd see like silhouettes of things coming toward me, something watching me sleep. There was a particular night where I remember looking up and seeing, I know this is silly, it might sound a little cliche, or like I'm just grasping something out of a pop culture, but I don't know how to explain it other than it was like a little grudge boy. Like there's a little pale, shirtless boy, like black hair, freaky bugged out eyes, black circles, the whole 9 yards. It's just like staring at me as I'm sleeping, and with his mouth open.
Really?
Like it was, yeah, it was scary. I don't know.
Wow.
I also that night, my girlfriend told me that she had sleep paralysis too, and she saw me walk into the middle of the room and pick up a book and look at her, and then like almost like I got beamed up into the sky like I'm in Star Trek, like a light, and I flew up in the air. And she said she thought I was an angel.
Oh, really?
And that morning before she told me that, I woke up and I looked down and saw her, and I just remember not having any control over my body. I could not, and I was fully conscious of myself and what was going on, but I just remember like going up into her face and then screaming as loud as I could. And she told me like I looked like I was terrified. And I was like crying because I was like, I'm being possessed and I'm going to do something bad and I can't help it. I didn't do anything else. It freaked me out really bad, and I know I yelled loud enough that like neighbors could hear. She left. I went upstairs. My grandma, my abuela, my Mexican grandma and grandpa were there. They're like super Catholic, and I remember like I was never really religious, but I was like, Grandma, did you hear that noise? No. You didn't hear me scream? No. No, hijo. Well, can you please? There's something going on. There's something on us. I need you to do a prayer or something. You know, like get it out of here. And so it like they prayed all day, and it didn't. It like seemed to stop it. It's crazy.
Really?
But
so a beam
is that psychological though? That's the question.
A beam of light. And what's really interesting about that is, the fact that a beam of light coming into your room, you being kind of like floating up into that light, that just is reminiscent of almost like an alien abduction. I mean, it just, if you were just to take out the spiritual side of that thing, you could just immediately think that that was something extraterrestrial, something out of the X-Files. That's what you would think that that was. So have you ever had an alien encounter?
Honestly, I've always kind of questioned if a lot of these things I went through were actually aliens. The most I can say, like, that I was really sure about, I really thought I had experienced alien stuff, was just UFOs, lights in the skies, doing things that just a star or a plane or
a satellite or something. Yeah, it just wouldn't be possible.
Kind of
yeah
zipping and like yeah, I've seen that a lot. Mm. I don't know.
You know, we've seen that too, and I know exactly what you're talking about because here in Colorado, there's a couple times that I'll take people up to a place that's called Wendigo Ridge. It's actually private property, but I have permission to go up there every now and then and investigate it because there are things. It was originally Native American land, and then there was a Homestead Act or something that happened in the 1800s in the territory of Colorado that allowed that property to be like sanctioned off into like this 40 acres parcel. And it sits in the middle of the national forest. There's only 4 of them in Colorado. So everything that surrounds you is national forest, but you can go in there and do whatever you want because it's private property on that 40 acres. So we've set up cameras before and we've caught so many things. And there's times when we've been up there and we've seen these floating white orb lights that just kind of dance on the ridge of the mountains. It's really bizarre. Yeah. It's very, very creepy, but fascinating at the same time. Like you become so mesmerized by it. And I think that's part of what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to attract you to it, you know, and make you curious about it.
I think that those things don't, I think that they don't really fuck with you as much. They don't happen as prevalent to people that don't let them in, right? Mm-hmm. And I think, like I always say, like I stared into the void long enough that it started staring back at me. Like that just feels right. Like there is something that I kind of invited into my life, and it took me a long time to get rid of it.
Yeah. I want to thank you for watching this video. I really hope that you enjoyed it. You know, we talk about a lot of crazy stuff here, so if you want to hear more, just like and subscribe to the channel. It'd really help us out a lot. And plus, if you have a crazy story, whether it be an alien abduction, near-death experience, or something of the paranormal, or a glitch in the matrix, please let us know. Share it in the comments. We'd love to have you on the show.